Welcome everyone to today's program, sponsored by the Plant Initiative, Microcosms, Sharing the Inner Lives of Plants. I'm Paul Moss, Executive Director of the Plant Initiative, and I'm very excited to introduce Stephen F. White and Jill Fluhaber, and to start off our 1-hour program, which will be moderated by Keith Williams. Stephen F. White is co-creator of Microcosms, an homage to sacred plants of the Americas, and a project at the juncture of art, science, and technology that emphasizes traditional ecological knowledge and biocultural heritage. He is co-editor with Luis Eduardo Luna of the Ayahuasca Reader, Encounters with the Amazon's Sacred Vine. His essay on Seba Petandra appeared in The Mind of Plants, Narratives of Vegetal Intelligence. He also did a bilingual eco-critical edition of 7 Trees Against the Dying Light by Nicaraguan poet Pablo Antonio Cuadra for Northwestern University Press. At St. Lawrence University, White was a founder of the Caribbean and Latin American Studies program, and for 34 years taught Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese language classes, as well as Latin American literature and film. He currently serves on the editorial board of Plant Perspectives. Microscopy specialist Jill Fluhaber worked for 17 years in biomedical research at Harvard, University of Kentucky, University of Texas Southwest Medical Center, where she was able to contribute to multiple publications in academic journals. At St. Lawrence University from 2004 to 2023, she taught courses in electron microscopy, confocal microscopy, and research methods in cell biology. She is co-founder of Microcosms and is currently conducting research in virology at the University of Kentucky. We also wanted to note that Papadakis Publisher in London will be doing a large format Microcosms book that will be out in September 2025 and will be launched at the opening of the Harvard University Exposition, Mapping Cross-Cultural Connectivity Through the Art and Science of Psychedelic Plants, to be held at the Paul S. Russell, MD Museum of Medical History and Innovation at Massachusetts General Hospital. Moderator Keith Williams is an assistant professor in the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies at Athabasca University. His work focuses on better understanding how to be good relations with our more than human kin, particularly plants and fungi. Keith draws heavily on post-human philosophy, indigenous thought, and his lived experience with family members, human and otherwise. Keith is a board member of the Plant Initiative. The first half hour will include a brief video introduction to the Microcosms project and conversation between Stephen, Jill, and Keith. Then for the remainder of the program, Stephen and Jill will be responding to questions posed by you, the attendees, that will be presented by Keith as selected from questions that are posted in the Zoom chat. So we encourage you to please suggest a question for Stephen or Jill to discuss by posting it in the chat, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. This program is being recorded and it will be posted online on the Plant Initiative's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording will be sent to everyone who registered today. With that, I'm turning over the program to Keith.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, Stephen and Jill, for joining us today and sharing your amazing work. And thank you to all of the attendees for joining us. Welcome, everyone. And I'd like to start by situating myself. I have one foot on the eastern side of the western door in Mi'kma'ki, or Nova Scotia, otherwise known as the Land of the Dawn, the unceded and ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq people. I specifically live in the region that was traditionally known as Sebeganegadik, or Land of the Wild Potato, otherwise known as Apios americana, or groundnut, related to the evocatively named Traveler's Delight. Sebeganegadik stretches all the way around the Minas Basin and includes parts of the greater Fundy Shore. My other foot is in the dish with one spoon territory on the Great Lakes at the northern limit of the Great Iroquoian civilization. I share this self-situation to bear witness to the ignored and in some cases forgotten histories of the lands that I call home, the places that I belong to. And I bring up the groundnut because this beautiful and interesting plant, very charismatic plant, was one of the 2 staple root crops of the indigenous peoples of northeastern Turtle Island. stretching from Haudenosaunee territory to Mi'kma'ki. As we go deeper into autumn, as the waning gibbous shifts to last quarter, as the squirrels ready their caches for the winter after a summer of plenty, cyclical change really is the only constant. And for me, in that, there's hope for liberation, for freedom, and for a better future for all of us and for all of our relations. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Stephen again, to offer a few words of acknowledgement.
There's always so many to thank and so much to be grateful for. Thank you for that, those opening words, Keith. So I'd like to thank the Plant Initiative and Paul Moss for sponsoring this event. Paul was supportive of the Microcosms project right from its beginning when we launched the website on Earth Day in 2022. And I'd like to express my deep gratitude to Eric Williams-Bergen for designing and building the website, and to Eden Williams-Bergen for maintaining and updating it. For the website, Jill Fluhaber scanned 50 different species of plants considered sacred by Native peoples throughout the Americas at St. Lawrence University's Microscopy and Imaging Center. It's been an enormous pleasure for me to collaborate with Jill on this dynamic project as it continues to grow and reach an ever larger audience. We especially appreciate Professor Stephen J. Haggerty and the Harvard University Mahindra Humanities Center for funding that will support next year's exhibit featuring microcosms and the work of legendary ethnobotanist Richard Evans Schultes. We're grateful too for the vote of confidence we recently received from Alexandra Papadakis, whose publishing house will bring out a beautiful Microcosms book to coincide with the Harvard exhibition. Thanks to Estela Calderon for the Microcosms music video that we're going to see soon. And thank you, Keith Williams, for being the moderator for today's conversation. But above all, I want to express my gratitude to the plants for their guidance, and to the Native peoples who know these plants best, who continue to preserve this knowledge over countless successive generations over time immemorial. Keith.
Wow. You know, before I launch into the questions, I just have to say thank you so much, Stephen and Jill. Every time I view Microcosms, especially that video, I mean, it's just, it floors me. Thank you. Okay, so in terms of the questions, my first question is for Jill. So Jill, as a scientist and specifically a microscopy specialist, I'm curious about your perspectives and motivations for working on this project. The images that you've created are beautiful and they're so interesting. And as many of us are probably aware, aesthetics is typically, perhaps wrongly, but typically considered outside the formal scope of scientific practice. What drew you to this specific project? Have you worked on similar art projects in the past? And has this project changed your relationship to your scientific work and your relationships with the vegetal world?
Okay, well, that's a sort of a broad brush here. So yes, I understand that people consider science not about aesthetics, but in fact, there are cases where scientists are interested in aesthetics, and the one example I will point out is the Nikon company has a contest every year online called the Small World Contest that is only for images captured with some form of light microscope. So that could be bright field, phase contrast, DIC, polarized, confocal fluorescence, anything that uses light of some sort. And so that contest is actually, hotly entered by many scientists around the world. And I mean, tens of thousands of entries at this point. And it's all just about how beautiful these, some of these images are. They're because they're gorgeous. They're amazing. I did encourage my students to submit some of their favorite images to the Small World Contest. And we did have one of my students in maybe 2014 was in the top 100 of the contestants, which was phenomenal. And his image was actually of American witch hazel. So I get it that you think scientists maybe are not all about aesthetics, but in some sense, we're all human, and we do appreciate the aesthetics of science. So what drew me to the project? It was more coincidence. So I taught confocal microscopy for almost 20 years at St. Lawrence to undergraduates, and not having an NIH budget to do this work, confocal microscopes are very expensive. We were lucky with a grant to acquire that confocal microscope, but also sample preparation is not really cheap. So confocals are normally used in scientific research, yes, and making those samples is not always cheap. And so looking to conserve the amount of money that I was spending, as well as to provide an easy way to help teach the undergraduates how to use the scope most effectively. We took a chance at imaging some plants because chlorophyll is fluorescent at several different wavelengths. So I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? Well, it became standard teaching technique to use plants as part of the course that I was teaching. Now, it was not the whole thing, but was a cost-saving thing for the students, for the school to be able to image plants, because you can literally cut a small piece of leaf, put it on a slide with mounting medium, and image it on the confocal microscope. That's fantastic. And my students in line with the Nikon Small World Contest, we had our own little contest every semester, where the students would choose the favorite of their images to post online with no names on it. I would post the contest to the university at large, and basically it was open to anyone to vote on the favorite images. It became sort of how people at the university knew me, because I spend most of my time in my little dark cave with the microscope, right? So fast forward to, what year was it, Stephen? 2016, I think, when you had the exhibit with Eduardo Luna at the university. And I came to the exhibit with no legal tender, and to get the ayahuasca readers. So on the following week, I emailed Stephen to ask if he had any extra ayahuasca readers, and he trotted one right down to me. And we looked at some of the images that were in the contest, and some of them were plants that the students had chosen. And Stephen said, do you think we could image some of the plants that make up the admixture of the ayahuasca? I'm like, well, sure, we can check it out. And the rest is history. So it wasn't really a planned project. It just sort of happened because we imaged, Banisteriopsis and Secotria, and then the gates opened and we started getting more and more plants and imaging more and more. Like, there was no specific number that we were necessarily planning on, but it became rather large. So let's see. So as far as other similar art projects, the students' images now are printed and posted in the science library at St. Lawrence, which is really quite nice. And has this changed my relationship to scientific work? Not really. Science is still science, but this project sort of coincided with my sort of awakening more and thinking more about interconnectedness of everything. So while science is still science, there's a lot of interconnections that go beyond science. And certainly this is one of those things that it has brought me closer to plants, because of course I really didn't have a whole lot of, plants are plants, but now I have a much deeper appreciation for them, because these plants kind of develop their own personalities. Like, coming in the mornings and pulling off the images was always quite humbling to see the different plant personalities. I really enjoyed that a lot.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill. So question number 2 is for Stephen. Stephen, in your introductory essay on phytoformalism, you write that each epoch seeks an opportunity to perceive the world in innovative ways in keeping with existing biotechnological capacity. Following Clark and Chalmers' work on the extended mind, one could easily imagine microscopes as a kind of extension of the self, and specifically our perceptual range. From my observations, indigenous peoples and sacred plant medicines have been sidelined in the contemporary psychedelic renaissance. Your work centers the plants and indigenous relationships with them. Do you see microcosms addressing this erasure or oversight in the medicalized and commercialized psychedelic sphere? What else might microcosms do in the world?
This is an important question, and here's what I have to say. Microscopes are definitely an essential tool for extending our vision beyond humanity's narrow biological filters. And so are eyeglasses. And what about how we use our eyesight to create the Hubble telescope, and now the James Webb Space Telescope, to perceive the universe in colors that no human eye has ever seen? And here's another question. Does this kind of seeing beyond parallel the neurological effects of the microcosms plants of power themselves, as they have crossed blood-brain barriers and exercised their profound influences in ritual contexts, in some cases for millennia? So one icon of the psychedelic renaissance, Ralph Metzner, describes two common comparisons made by writers regarding experiences with psychoactive substances. He writes it that one is the amplifier analogy, according to which the drug functions as a nonspecific amplifier of both inner and outer stimuli. The other analogy is the microscope metaphor. It has been repeatedly said, writes Metzner, that psychedelics could play the same role in psychology as the microscope does in biology, opening up realms in the human mind to direct, repeatable, verifiable observation that have been hitherto largely hidden or inaccessible. So this is an interesting idea, but if this kind of rational Western model leads to the medicalization and commercialization of sacred plant medicines, as well as the erasure of indigenous peoples, as you observed, Keith, we will have shirked an ethical responsibility to understand how scientific ecological knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge can grow and thrive together, potentiating each other more effectively. So for Robin Wall Kimmerer, the celebrated author of Braiding Sweetgrass, these two knowledge systems need to exist in a sovereign, autonomous way based on mutual respect. This is the way to resist cultural imperialism, democratize science to increase its accessibility, and begin to free science from its determination, commodify intellectual property with unacknowledged indigenous origins, and exploit it for private financial gain. So getting back to the idea of vehicles for seeing, in his English translation of the Popol Vuh, Dennis Tedlock speaks of how the Maya Council Book itself was considered by the lords of Quiché an ilbal, a seeing instrument or a place to see. And with this, they could know distant or future events. Curiously, as Tedlock also explains, today, now, ilbal refers to crystals used for gazing by diviners and to eyeglasses, binoculars, and telescopes. Could this be extended to include the confocal microscope as yet another instrument for augmenting the limits of human vision? And perhaps microcosms as a gathering of vegetal lives and their stories in relation to humans might also be considered in its entirety a privileged and strategic vantage point, an aesthetic site that reveals better ways to proceed into a future that is bound to be grim and dominated by what most concerned the Maya seers: extreme weather conditions, famine, and war. That's one of the things that I think microcosms can do in the world.
Thank you, Stephen. Jill, I have another question for you, and this is in a way follows up on the previous question, and so you may have answered some of this already, but perhaps not. So Jill, as a researcher and educator, can you share a little bit about how you envision microcosms being used in people's classrooms, and how microcosms has been used by other educators, and the potential role of both art and culture, and in this case, indigenous cultures of the Americas in scientific higher education?
Big question. Microcosms, what can it not be used for in education? Really, you can look at, botany, the physical structure of the plants. You can look at that. You can look at biochemistry, physiology, ethnobotany, cultural anthropology. The list goes on and on and on. Art, all sorts of art, indigenous art, meditation. There are just a huge laundry list of things that this can be used for. It's what I really love about it is also as science, the images portray things that I want to go down these rabbit holes and figure out what are these terpenes that are transiting through the trichomes. You know, what are they in biochemistry? Because a lot of the psychoactive molecules as well, I believe the terpenes have fluoresce in different colors. So, you know, I find that's super interesting to me. I would love to learn more about that. There's almost nothing that you can't use microcosms for to bring together the science, you know, teaching microscopy, teaching botany, teaching ethnobotany, to all the way through art history, indigenous art, cultures. I just don't see any real limit, except for maybe math, to the use of this. I mean, pick your poison. What do you want to focus on? And I think that microcosms has a space in that. Sorry if I'm not a little more specific about that, but it's certainly and I kind of hope in this whole interconnectedness space that we're looking at, to realize that medicines today, you know, were brought about and were extracted originally from plants. Like that's where everything came from. The natural healing and the shamans and the indigenous uses of these plants, it was for a reason. Now, you know, I recognize that people today sort of like the hammer paradigm, where they can take something that's going to suddenly fix everything, but really it's more about the butterfly effect and looking at the ecosystems that work together to make the medicine with these plants. I don't know, I think it all sort of comes together in a big loop. And I'm hoping that society is sort of making their way back around from just hard medicine, to understanding and appreciating that maybe nature knows best.
Thank you, Jill. I really appreciate that kind of strand of relationality and interconnectedness that I see coming through in your responses to both of those questions. Thank you. So my next question is for Stephen. Stephen, I see microscopy as following a fairly recent lineage of thought in Western science that looks to ever granular empirical study as the source of knowledge, taken to an extreme in the molecular field. This differs from, for instance, late 18th century science, which, according to Michel Foucault in his Birth of the Clinic, was a science of homology and correspondence. I see your work in microcosms as potentially playing an important role in bridging this conceptual divide. Do you agree with this observation? And if yes, how could centering homology and correspondence shift the ways in which we look at sacred plant medicines and the natural world more broadly? And I think, Jill, you might have actually gotten into some of that in your response just now. But
Yeah. So Michel Foucault's Birth of the Clinic was originally published in French in 1963 and translated into English 10 years later. And the author says that his book is about the act of seeing, the gaze of the doctor, and a change in medical discourse that began in the late 18th century in France with the work of French pathologist Xavier Bichat. He lived from 1771 to 1802. So what was the source of this change? It was really a newfound fervor for dissecting corpses as a way of getting below the surface of the skin into the tissual level in order to observe the pathology of disease. So interestingly, Bichat rejected microscopes as a tool for seeing and preferred identifying different kinds of human tissue based solely on what he could perceive with the naked eye. And he published his pioneering work in his treatise on membranes that was published in 1800. So to a certain extent, Microcosms employs a similar gaze in its relationship with the invisible, suddenly or perhaps even shockingly or gloriously made visible through microscopy. There are similarities in botanical form across species. We've talked about dermal tissue, trichomes, pollen, xylem, and we're gazing like subversive physicians in a rational, perhaps even clinical way, deep into the transfixed living biological material of vegetal organisms. But we're not engaged with the pathology of cadavers. We're peering into plants, discovering that organism is art, and conversely, art is organism. And by the way, after some 7 years since our project began, I'm still caring for most of the plants in microcosms here at home. Lancia, Ololiuki, Turbina corimbosa, some of the stars of microcosms accompanying us here in the webinar. So I want to sow them, grow them, and know them as well as I can through their life cycles, feeling my life evolve with theirs. So the confocal representations of plants in microcosms are in many ways self-portraits, what they are revealing about themselves, or as Foucault might put it, showing their first face of truth. Microcosms is an affirmation of vitality, a celebration of the inner lives of plants and their power to change how we regularly perceive the world. So microcosms for me is a revelatory experience, not entirely unlike the traditional healing practices of visionary doctors, who also work with the concept of rendering visible the invisible for diagnostic purposes. They see disturbed patterns of an interior diseased world revealed as healing music sketched in the air over the patient's body, perhaps by the long beak of the hummingbird scribe, assistant, and ally called Pino by the Shipibo. The healer relies on what Foucault might call fidelity to the colored content of experience, to say, or maybe more appropriately in this case, to sing what one sees. The big difference is that Foucault is talking about the medical gaze applied to a corpse open for examination. For the visionary doctor, disease is treatable because it's suddenly brought into legibility and is subject to language as the repeated variations of lyrics to a song provided by the mother of the specific healing plant. Which plants? Many can be found in microcosms, and these vegetal entities are relatives, worthy of our care and our utmost respect. Likewise, the people who know them best and the ancestral lands they inhabit.
Wow, thank you, Stephen. It's now about 25 minutes to the hour, so I think it's probably a good moment to transition into audience questions. And thank you, Paul, for putting a few of them, sending a few of them directly to me from the chat. So I'll read the first one. The first one is from Issy Clark, and Issy is wondering if our technical ability to expand our Umwelt with microscopes, bat detectors, etc., may actually distance us more from other Earth beings who are restricted to the sensorium that they are given. It's a devil's advocate question, but I fear that our increased capacities might lead not to connection, but to regarding others as, in the Heideggerian way, as poor in the world. I can reread that or parts of that if you'd like.
From the technological standpoint, Jill, how would you view these issues?
I think for me, it's the converse. Being able to see these plants in a much different light has opened my eyes to things I hadn't thought about before, to realms that I hadn't, I hadn't really spent much time thinking about. So in my little sphere, it has enhanced my feelings of connection.
Mhm.
And I would hope that these images would also help others to feel connected in a very different way than what we normally see with plants. This is stuff that people don't get to see. This is a very unusual ability that we have to see the inner world of plants in this way. We are seeing not just structure, but we are also seeing function. You see stoma that are open, stoma that are closed. The open stoma, the plants are breathing. You see trichomes carrying terpenes for plant defense and protection. We see xylem that carry nutrients to the plants. These are things that we don't normally see. So we are seeing biology in action in a very real sense. And I would hope that being able to see that would enhance people's connection rather than hinder it.
Yeah, I would have to agree wholeheartedly with Jill on this. I mean, if you think about stomata and having the chance to sort of be witness to the process of plants breathing and understand that you as an individual are sharing the air with these different species and co-evolving with them, then the images in microcosms become like sites of contemplation. And this implies to me a real nearness to the species. I don't know if the people who are attending the webinar have had the chance to look at The Light Eaters, a new book by Zoe Schlanger. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. And one of the ideas in her book is she talks about the plants that are around her in her life, not necessarily outside, but the plants that she's taking care of at home. And she has an interesting idea and regarding houseplants. She says, did they breathe meaning into the air through chemical compounds the way their wild counterparts almost certainly do? Fantastic idea. I mean, this also brings us closer to the idea of communication and chemistry and shared methods of communication. I don't know. I feel much closer to the plants after working on microcosms and being with the plants in this different way.
Wow. Thank you, Stephen and Jill. Yeah, really fascinating question and an important one. Peter Webb also has a very interesting question, and that is, how do you feel about wonder and awe? And I think, Stephen, you might have addressed a little bit of this in your response to question 4, and that's our ability. So how do you feel about wonder and awe, our ability to not know as a path towards knowing? That's fantastic. As a first step into scientific exploration and verification.
Right. I've been doing I did a little bit of research um, in preparing the long essay that appears on the Microcosms website. And it took me back to the 1920s, more or less, when there was a real improvement in the technology with microscopes. So people were able to see, maybe a teacher and students were able to see things like very small organisms that had never been perceived before, moving in a drop of water through the microscope for the first time. And there was just a sense of absolute awe, wonder, rapture. It was an uncontainable joy to see these worlds revealed. And, I think you could make a case, a strong case for abstract modern art, with Paul Klee and Vasily Kandinsky, creating this new artistic movement based on biomorphic forms that they learned from microscopy. and incorporated into their art. So who knows where the wonder and awe, if that's what Microcosms produces, who knows where it will lead us? Wherever it wants to take us, I think we should go.
Well, I
Yeah,
certainly think it's wonderful and awesome.
yeah, I agree that we need to be open to where this will lead us, because who knows? I have thoughts, but part of science is, being open to where things are going to go. Like, we don't know everything. That's the whole point of science, is trying to tease out more things that we can learn. The more we know, the more we realize we don't know. So I think this is a great path to just definitely the wonder and awe of the universe at large. Like, it's amazing what we don't know. Like, it's amazing. It's incredible.
Thank you, Jill. There is a follow-up question related to that question that Marguerite Ullman Bauer shared, and that is perceiving with the naked eye, yet even more so valuing our somatic systems that inform us. How does that fit in? How does that fit into this? How does that fit in as importantly? I'm not sure. Yeah, so I think maybe just to paraphrase, maybe what could you speak to the somatic experience of creating and viewing microcosms? And maybe it's the relationship between that somatic experience and wonder. If you feel that there is one. There was for me when I saw it.
There definitely is. So I was explaining to Paul a little bit earlier that when I was taking these images, I never knew what I was going to get. So I would set the microscope up just with white light, looking for different spots. I would set up maybe 20 different spots, because when you look at a plant under regular fluorescent light, you have all of the layers of out of focus fluorescence. It makes it not as specific, shall I say. It's light of green usually. And then I would set up the lasers the intensity on the microscope, through the different layers, and then I would let it run overnight. And I would come in the morning, and you have to envision it's a dark room, right? Because confocal microscopy is done basically in the dark, with a great big monitor overhead. And I would come in the morning, all the images would be captured, but I'd have to put them to all the layers together to make one image. And to see them come out in the mornings, it was so cool. Like, we always looked forward to it. Stephen would be at his house usually, and I'd be like, oh, you've got to see this on a video sometime. Like, here are the images coming up. It was an amazing experience. It really, probably more exciting and thrilling to me than looking at specifically stained, plant cells or mammalian cells, and you sort of know what you're going to get. This time, I would never know what I was going to get, and it was really cool.
I think it's important to point out, just adding to Jill's comment, that these are not photographs, they're images constructed over time. So, I mean, if you think about it, there's 350 images that we chose for the website, but there are probably 3,500 that we looked at to choose the ones that we liked the best. And each of those images, each of those confocal images took 1 hour to construct. That's a huge investment of time and patience over a long period of time to work with so many, dozens of different plant species, 50.
Great. Thank you, Jill and Stephen. There is a fantastic question from Talking Rivers. There's a kind of it's a multi-pronged triple barrel question, but excellent question. I'll read it slowly because it's long. How do you respect the privacy and rights of these plant people more than human beings that are pictured in your work? How do you honor the plant entities that you put under the microscope? Do you ask for their permission to be photographed? And how do you give back to them? And feel free to ask me to reread any of those at any point.
That's a really really wonderful question.
Mhm.
And look up Talking Rivers. They are doing some of the most important work right now with regard to the rights of nature movement. Pay attention and attend the seminars. That Talking Rivers sponsored. Leads one to just reiterate respect for the plants, respect for them in terms of, yes, asking permission, understanding that permission might not be given, understanding that what we hope will be revealed might not be revealed, and that you might feel like a sense of anger from the plants, um, that they don't want to be treated in this way, perhaps. But I mean, I think that I think that if you recognize the personhood of these plants, that means that you are saying that yes, these plants have agency, they have volition, and they have the right to exist for their own sake. And that leads us into the whole rights of nature movement. Um, the more than human species, also elements like rivers, like different land formations, rocks, so that all of this comes together in ways that are extremely important to recognize.
Thank you, Stephen. Thinking, I don't see any additional questions. If not, I know Paul has a question, and I also have another question. Oh, wait. Oh, we do have we have a question. Okay. Marguerite Ullman Bauer said, to then add to Talking Rivers' points on nature and plant agency, this last query to Jill, Keith, and Stephen, in your opinions, from all your years of firsthand intimate experiences in the field and lab, how do you abide by a plant's consent? Or perhaps how do you determine that that plant has given consent to be surveilled or to be photographed or to be oh okay, maybe that wasn't quite it, but that as well. So yeah, maybe if you want to speak a little bit more about consent, that might be a thought.
When we first started this project, the coincidence of my connection with Stephen on, which you have to understand, St. Lawrence is a small campus, but it's still segregated into one side and the others, sciences versus humanities. And the orbits that Stephen and I traveled in did not coincide until this project. And I feel like there was a reason for that. I do, again, this whole interconnectedness, I think there was a reason for it. And at the time I told Stephen, I'm like, I think the plants are saying it's time we would like to be seen in a new light, in this way.
Interesting.
So
So
yeah, go ahead, Keith,
just
please.
to kind of paraphrase, or just so that I can understand, it's almost like there was a coincidence or a synchronicity of events that led to this impression or understanding that the plants wanted to be engaged with in this way. Is that correct?
I would say so. That was my feeling about the whole thing.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry for interrupting, Stephen.
No, that's quite all right. I mean, your perspective is most welcome. For me, um, sometimes I need to sort of confide in tobacco, Nicotiana rustica, the wild tobacco, as I try to um, just ascertain how to proceed and how to ask for permission. Nothing happens without tobacco, at least for me. And um, it's curious because I you do sense a communication, and it's a question of proceeding slowly and not being impatient. And the other thing is that um, the amount of material used on a slide is so tiny. It's not even a whole leaf. It's not a whole flower. It's just a very tiny piece um, that is suitable for mounting in a specific way with a certain process on the slide. And like I say, um, here are the plants with us today, and I'm taking care of them as best I can. And we seem to be getting along well. Everybody's inside after the first hard frost in upstate New York, and we're hoping for a good winter with not too many aphids and mites.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And those plants do look they look happy, I have to say. Um, so there are two more questions, and we probably have to leave about 3 minutes or so to wrap up. And I think, Stephen, you had a few words, and then Paul had a wrap up. So maybe if I'll read the two questions, and then maybe if we could just answer them in a couple of minutes, that would be great. So the first one is around invasive species. How do we define invasive species in this context? Or, and I would imagine that has to do perhaps with the fact that many of these species that you've profiled are tropical or subtropical. And then I guess the other question here, if I can just scroll down, it's from a farmer owner. I do not want to eat plants that feel threatened. Should I just talk to them? How do I handle the fact they will be harvested for my consumption? And that is a fundamental question, in life. But so those are the two questions, and I don't know if either or both of you want to take a couple of minutes to just have a crack at them. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, Jill, do you have any thoughts on this?
Um, it takes me a minute to formulate my thoughts. Go ahead, Stephen, because I'm still sort of processing and trying to figure out
Right.
what I would say to that.
There's a real issue right now among um, the psychedelic community or the people who are using psychedelic plants, psychoactive plants. Um, there's a serious issue of over harvesting, overusing. These are issues that have to be taken into consideration very, very seriously in the community. The plants uh, are definitely threatened. I mean, I don't think we have included in microcosms among these plants that are considered invasive species. I think many of them are considered plants that are threatened because of their habitats are threatened. For example, in the Amazon basin, so that right now they're experiencing a tremendous drought throughout the Amazon, and of course this would have an extremely negative effect on flora, the fauna from that region. Um, I think that it's very valid to ask if the plants that you consume are being harvested sustainably, and what's the proof of that? These are legitimate questions to ask yourself and the people who are vendors.
Totally. Yeah. Jill, did you want to add anything to those two responses?
I'm
Okay.
not sure I have a whole lot specifically to add to that at this time. I'm still processing.
Well,
Yeah,
I think, you know,
and just briefly, you know, in Michael Pollan's work, he talks about not wanting to incorporate Lophophora williamsii in his writing, peyote, because this is reserved for Native Americans, and it is a threatened species. And so his ethical response was to work with San Pedro, Wachuma, Echinopsis pachinoi instead.
yeah, great. Well, no, thank you, Stephen. And you know, those are some fantastic questions that we've received from the audience, and some of them are questions that I think we probably should all ponder as life questions. Whether it's, you know, Peter's question about wonder and awe, or Issy Clark's question about oh my goodness, I don't, oh, about the technology distancing ourselves from the rest of the world, or Owner's question about farming. At this point, I think it's time to transition to a few final words from Stephen, and then some concluding thoughts from Paul. And so, thank you everyone for such excellent questions.
So thank you, Keith. One of the plants included in Microcosms is Zea luxurians, or teosinte, the ancestor of the sacred plant corn. So about 9,000 years ago, ancient peoples from Mesoamerica began to develop teosinte into a plant that more closely resembles what we know as corn. The process of domestication resulted in a reduction of genetic diversity that makes maize more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So now, in a strange undoing and remaking of ethnobotanical history, scientists are attempting to restore certain desired ancestral characteristics of teosinte without sacrificing the current traits of modern maize, in order to allow the plant to adapt more effectively to abiotic and biotic stresses. I mean, when I was reading about this new research, I mean, this is in the last 2 or 3 years or so, in terms of the kind of experiments that are happening. I just thought, this is amazing. The introgression of genetic qualities going back to the ancestor of corn, teosinte, to make a plant that might survive more effectively in our world and the way it is now. So behind me is a painting by Estela Calderon called Cosecha, Harvest. She's the author of an essay called Corn is Also What Roots Me. It was first published in The Mind of Plants, edited by John Ryan, Patricia Vieira, and Monica Galliano. So just let me end by reading a small fragment of that piece on corn, written from the perspective of a girl growing up on a family farm in rural Nicaragua. How do the seeds know when they need to be born? I asked my mother. All the seeds sleep in peace beneath the ground, but when the first thunder sounds, announcing the rain, the seeds wake up and go out, curious to find out who made all that noise, she replied. And then the rain gets them wet. They like the rain and they're happy when they hear the people, and especially the children, go outside to take a bath in the rain the way you do. The seeds stay up here and their leaves and flowers grow so they can give us the gift of their fruit. The flowers live on the memories of other plants that came before them. Flowers don't know death because they always leave their seeds to be awakened by thunder. From that moment on, I've always felt that my mother's theory was right about how plants are born and communicate with us. In the hopes of never forgetting that idea, I wrote the poem To Be Reborn that reads, some people say flowers are born from their memories and live without thinking of death. Thanks very much for your attention at the Plant Initiative webinar today.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you so
Paul,
much. Jill, did you want to just say any final words?
I just want to thank the Plant Initiative, Keith and Paul. Stephen, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I appreciate all of your input.
Great, thank you,
Help
Jill.
us.
I'll
Thank you.
just do a quick wrap up. I just want to thank again Stephen, Jill, and Keith so much for such an interesting and wide-ranging conversation. And also thanks to the audience members for sharing your stimulating questions. This program has been one of a series of online events about the human-plant connection. And we're planning another program on November 20th with Dakota author Diane Wilson in conversation about her book, The Seed Keeper. So we hope you'll join us for that event as well. So thanks again for attending today. And if you'd like to support these types of programs from the Plant Initiative, we're always appreciative of donations to our website, plantinitiative.org.